You know what I think a lot of animated films and franchises are kind of struggling with in the last couple of years? Developing protagonists that are compelling and that the audience is able to relate to on some level, that the audience likes and wants to see succeed, and most importantly, that the audience wants to see more of. Wants to see more of that character's story, which in turn gets them to pay money and buy tickets. For me, there are few studios that are quite so skilled at developing compelling protagonists than Dreamworks Animation, or at least old school Dreamworks, as the jury's still out on the modern version. We're talking about the studio right from their foundation through to the 2000s and 2010s. There's so many classic heroes for us to look at, but for me, there's one that stands above the rest, and that has got to be Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III. The main character and lead protagonist across the three How to Train Your Dragon animated films, as well as the Dreamworks Dragons TV show, which is better known by the sub-brand names Riders of Berk, Defenders of Berk, and Race to the Edge, but for the purpose of this video, we're not going to be talking about the events of the show. For starters, whilst the films are canon to the shows, I wouldn't say the reverse is true. I'm pretty sure the filmmakers were not at all taking into account anything that happens in those shows, and they were charting their own course. In fact, I have heard the film division of Dreamworks kind of looks down on the TV division. Honestly, I do find that kind of rich considering the film divisions crashed out so hard over the years that they no longer do their animation in-house, and were usurped by Illumination to replace them in the animated film studio's Big Three. Oh well, enough about that for the time being. We can talk about that dynamic and maybe the show in general in more depth in another video. For now though, we're here to talk about Hiccup and how I think he might be among the best, if not the best written animated protagonists of all time, at least from the perspective of animated films from the major companies. The dude just has it, and granted, a big part of his appeal to me is that he got a trilogy to flesh out that character and cement himself as the GOAT, but regardless, he really is just so compelling in every single way. Now let's get stuck into all the reasons why. For starters, I think it's because he's a relatable character that draws you in. That's what captures you from the very beginning, because no matter who you are, the majority of the world's able to understand that feeling of not quite fitting in and struggling to find your place. On top of that, the world that he inhabits is absolutely bonkers. It's filled with a bunch of giant, insane Vikings who love to fight and kill dragons, and who are physically strong enough to do so. They are absolutely insane in the best of ways. But because they're completely insane, they work best as the featured character, not your lead. Hiccup, in contrast, is actually quite normal, and because of that, he is the best audience POV/self-insert character you could ask for. He's not particularly talented at fighting, and is extremely weak physically. He can't fight dragons one-to-one with an axe, helmet, and shield. He'd get gobbled up for dinner, and that's the point of his character. Everybody in the village sort of hates him, and his own dad, the chief, is clearly disappointed in him, and everything in his life just seems shit. When you first meet him, he's at his lowest point, and you get to watch the power fantasy play out before your very eyes across the course of that very first film in a way that doesn't feel forced. Instead of using his brawn and fighting skill like pretty much every other dragon-fighting Viking that's come before him, he uses his brain. First, by using technology and ingenuity to try to keep up with the other Vikings. Whilst he is weak physically, his mind is sharp, which is how he builds his machine that he uses to snipe out Toothless mid-flight. But his use of his brain to push forward the story and develop his character doesn't end there. He learns about Toothless and about dragons in general, which teaches him that in the end, they aren't so different, that they don't need to fight, and there could be a better way to live their lives on Berk rather than spending every single evening fighting off the latest in a long line of dragon assaults, which ends with injuries and deaths on both sides. This intelligence is not all that sets him apart in that first movie though. It's also his compassion. Compassion not just for the dragons, but for the Vikings of Berk too. It would be so easy to write his character to be bitter towards the Vikings that shunned him, to mock them, belittle them with every chance he gets, to become needlessly edgy and angry, but that's not the way he's framed. He's kind, and he provides a guiding hand for the dragons and the Vikings to follow. At the same time, it is his innate compassion and inability to kill Toothless after he shot him down with his machine that sets him on the path to learning about the dragons and being able to save them and his father's army from being murdered by the Red Death. What I think works so well here is that he has to do it his way, with his mind and his heart and the friendships that he builds because of those traits. He doesn't become some magically gifted warrior over the course of the movie, or really, over the course of the trilogy. The dude's always a step behind on that front, and yet, it doesn't really matter, because through his other qualities he proves himself to be a true Viking and a worthy chieftain of Berk, and then of New Berk too. On top of that, it's not just his place in the tribe and peace with Vikings and dragons that he secures using both his intelligence and compassion. It's the acceptance and love of his father, being able to finally understand just how much he cares about him and connecting with him on a deeper level. It's being able to capture the notice of the girl he likes who previously would never have even given him the time of day. Once again though, none of this is because of his actual traditional Viking skills, but as a result of what sets him apart from them all. What makes him different. That's eventually what earns their respect, approval, and love. So he's set up to be this perfect character, but then I love that they give him more negative traits too, which balance out those virtues. They help to inform his arc within the trilogy. Whilst he clearly loves the Vikings of Berk and his father, and he does want to fit in, I mean, that's pretty much his whole vibe over the course of that first movie after all, at the very same time it's clear that he does somewhat look down on their intelligence, almost as a defense mechanism at first. mocking them somewhat with the things that he says, and just having a bit of angst. However, it's more in the second film where you start to see that be warped into a Hiccup knows best mentality. In a lot of ways, that's good, because the reality is that he and his inventions and his love for dragons and the knowledge that he's gained is the major reason that Burke's in the midst of what is a golden age. They're living in an era where there's complete and total integration with dragons and Vikings. No more battles, no more deaths, just peace all around. So clearly he thinks he's going to be able to maintain that peace. He'll be able to diffuse the tensions when Drago Bloodfist makes it known that he's on the way and he's out for blood. He believes that since he was able to make his dad and the entirety of the Burkian population change from their warmongering dragon-slaying ways, that he'll be able to make Drago see sense too. That he can reform this bloodthirsty warlord into a man of reason, who can live in peace and harmony with dragonkind just like the rest of them. Hiccup thinks that he can be the grand savior that's able to turn the tide and bring peace and harmony to humans and dragons forevermore. He's going to be the guy who once again is able to do what his father couldn't do. He almost feels a bit infantilizing and condescending. Oh, you big brawny Vikings, of course you couldn't calm Drago down, you just need to talk to him. Trust me, words always work. Ignore the fact that this guy brutally murdered a whole horde of other chiefs using the power of dragons, and that my dad was lucky to escape with his life on that terrible day. Of course, we the audience know better, because could you imagine how anticlimactic the second movie would be if the ending was him and Hiccup hugging it out and there was no battle at all? I mean, it would have been funny and the biggest movie troll job of all time, but yeah, it would have killed the franchise dead. So we have Hiccup, and he doesn't listen to his father about what Drago's like and how they can seek peace, and nobody has to fight and die. What does this lead to? Well, it leads to Hiccup getting caught with his pants down against Drago, which allows him to take control of Toothless and therefore directly leads to Stoic's death, and leaves Hiccup essentially alone in the world without a parent. Yeah, his mum's still alive, but let's be real, she ditched out on his entire life, and she only came back once he was a grown man. It's not the same as losing the dad that raised him, known him all his life, and who had finally been able to make a breakthrough with to find a deeper connection. Once again, it would have been so easy to have Hiccup legitimately always be right about everything to do with dragons and with human nature. To have him actually making progress with Drago, and then things break down not due to Hiccup's fault, but leaving enough proof to the audience that he would have been able to succeed in bringing Drago around given the right circumstances. But that's not what they do here. They have him fail, and it's almost entirely due to his own naivety and certainty that he's right. So here we have a protagonist who has a reasonable growth in power and status due to his own virtues and skills, but who doesn't suddenly have to change his entire persona or skill set in order to fit in with the narrative. He doesn't become some sort of Gary Stew who's able to do everything. He has his way of dealing with things and it works very well. At the same time, they don't keep him stagnant. He has a clear arc across the films that you can see, and his character learns and grows from all his different experiences. You can have him rise early in the first film and prove that his way of dealing with Dragon-Viking relations is the right one 100%. However, he falls short because he's too hyper-focused on his goals and this idea that he's the one who truly knows best, and it almost costs him everything as a result. This then goes into his arc in the third movie, where he has to once again let go of what he thinks is right and realize that what he thinks and feels isn't necessarily the objective truth. This idea that he always has to be with the dragons and be with Toothless in particular, and that humans and dragons can peacefully coexist as one group. Thus, he has to let go of that dream for at least his lifetime and hope that things will one day change. Already, I think that gives him so much more depth than the majority of characters. I realize that this is due to the fact that he got a full trilogy to explore his arc in depth, and most characters are only one and done or just get a sequel, but hey, I don't hate the player, hate the game. But wait, there's more! Because I think we can also include the short film technically set before the epilogue in the third movie, How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming. Here, we have Hiccup teaching his children about dragons, and his eldest is questioning him after taking a look at the Book of Dragons pre-Hiccup and Toothless era. Whilst in the first three movies, Hiccup's gone from fighting for what he believes in, to learning humility and that he doesn't always get it right, to relying on Toothless and his dragons too much at the expense of what is truly important, and yet despite it all, he remains the leader, the hero. In Homecoming, he's confronted with the idea that whilst what he did in life is important, the message of unity and friendship with the dragons was more important than him personally. This is especially difficult, as the rest of the community largely treats him as a bit of a joke in a pageant about introducing dragons to the Vikings. Due to his bond with Toothless, he was hanging on to this image that he's the Dragon Master and everyone should know it. But what won out in the end wasn't how they got there, but how it felt and what mattered. Even as an adult with children and the chieftain of New Burke, he's still growing as a person, and that's what makes him relatable. You can easily identify with the character and put yourself in his shoes. Yes, throughout the story he's dealing with otherworldly threats like giant dragons and crazy Viking murderers and whatnot, but when you boil it down, a lot of the things he goes through are very normalized issues. Trying to impress somebody that you have a crush on and earn their affection. Dealing with feelings of social isolation or like you don't fit in. Having imposter syndrome. Trying to earn the approval and love of a parent who you feel is so different to yourself. Right down to reconnecting with his deadbeat mum and not really taking her to task for anything at all because he clearly has been so desperate to find somebody that's actually like him. Not somebody like Astrid or Stoic who accepts and loves him for who he is, but somebody who is exactly like him in the way that he sees the world. All the way to cherishing his personal relationship with Toothless and not needing to rely on his hero persona to feel like he matters. I think it also helps that he has a great voice portrayal with this dorky, quirky vibe that never really goes away but eventually gets buried under layers of charisma as the trilogy goes on. Oh, and he also has great chemistry with pretty much every single character he speaks to. And he's funny to boot! A lot of the times the protagonist is kind of an everyman blank slate with other characters around them being the sole comic relief. That's true here to an extent, but he's also very witty and cheeky, and especially in the first film, he's a form of comic relief all of his own. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that despite the fact that there are no dragons roaming the earth, that we're aware of course, everyone can see themselves in Hiccup in some way. Everyone's felt sidelined, alone, been afraid of judgment, and desperately needing to find their place in the world. Then once you get there, you realise you still have more work to do. That's why Hiccup's the best. He's the everyman character, despite being uniquely himself. At least, that's what I think. Maybe you have a different view, because, these are only my opinions, and I'd like to hear yours. What do you think about my ramblings about Hiccup? Are you with me? Maybe not. I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.